Well, good evening, everybody. Happy rainy, wet Friday. It's the complete opposite of what my last post was in terms of weather and also feeling because, well, I don't want to talk about the rain. I mean, I'm British, but I'm not that British. I do want to talk about a sort of type of rain, and that's tears. Have you ever given that advice to just cry it out, or you know that if you just allow yourself some time to cry over something, you'll feel better at the end of it? Well, since this series is about coaching strategies or coping strategies to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, one of the ways that we do actually cope with the peaks and troughs of life is moments of crying. Now, I will spare you the actual tears, but women on average cry more than double the amount that men do. But have you been crying more than usual during this period? Do you feel good as a result of crying? Have you been crying in front of other people, crying alone? Are you a natural crier anyway? Now, research is mixed on whether actually crying is good for us or not. Some say there is a chemical change that happens, that the act of crying releases stress hormones, and therefore there's an exchange in terms of our chemical imbalance that makes us feel good as a result of it. But there are lots of other studies that say actually crying makes us feel worse about something. However, what's interesting is most people will self-report that an episode of crying has made them feel good, whether it actually did in the moment or not. Perhaps it's because we feel embarrassed about that crying episode, so we want it to be useful in some way, so we reappraise it as something that's positive. But the way we cry and the places that we cry are interesting, because if we cry in front of someone, it often signals that you need some support, which you then often get. Now, if you get more support, you feel more connected. If you feel more connected, well, then connection leads to being a mental health strategy and the obvious benefits that ensues. When we cry in front of someone, it often creates a type of emotional contagion and empathy where they might start crying too. And then a very powerful connection exists between two or more individuals where perhaps you're sharing a shared understanding of a situation. So crying in front of someone would make logical sense that there would be a benefit for it very often because we might get some support at the end of it. But there are all sorts of cultural reasons why we might choose not to do that. There are gender differences. There are social expectation differences that may mean that we don't want to break the rules of the river that we're swimming in. So what are the benefits of crying alone, for example? Well, any expression of emotion dissipates that emotion. You might get really angry and scream, but once you've done that, while it might not be great for everyone else around you, you don't feel the same level of anger. Sadness is the same. You're not going to cry forever. Maybe it's not the crying itself that makes you feel better at the end of it, just that the only way is up. There's also some evidence to suggest that crying itself is a self-soothing strategy, because when we notice tears running down our cheeks, it brings us into the present moment, where we're aware of our own psychological state and think to ourselves, I must do something at this point to protect myself. So we go into employing some strategies to therefore support our mental health and make ourselves feel better. If we sob, for example, there's a noise that's attached to sobbing, which has been suggested may create a meditative, rhythmic pattern that helps to regulate our breathing and makes us feel more peaceful and calmer. So whether it's that seeing our own tears provide a feedback loop that we need to look after ourselves, or it's the pattern of the way that we cry that actually is a soothing pattern, there's no doubt that culturally in a lot of situations, crying alone is something that's more accepted. We all find ourselves now in more private settings, and maybe that allows us to feel that we can cry a little bit more and a little bit more frequently if you find that you are. If you ask people what makes them cry, they often talk about the big stuff: love, death, the loss of a relationship. Whereas in reality, studies on when people cry show that crying is often associated with much more pedestrian everyday activities. It's essentially when we sweat the small stuff. I don't know about you, but there's big stuff to be sweated at the moment as well as small stuff. And while the reason we cry might not be that important, recognising what is happening when we are might be. Essentially, whether crying is good or not for you is entirely subjective. If you know that you feel better crying into your pillow for half an hour, well, at least you've got some pretty good reasons why it might be good for you after all. Stay calm.